Gardener's World has been extended to an hour, and over the next 7 weeks we shall be exploring traditional ideas with a surprising twist.
I like a rockery where the rocks take centre stage.
Taking it to the extreme.
Never before have I used a winch to get a shrub out.
Getting a feel for the exotic.
I'm instantly getting the impression we're in for a treat.
Looking for inspiration.
Gardening is grown-ups going outside to play.
That, to me, is exactly what it is.
And offering tips and advice.
So there's some real challenges in this border, but in fact there's some really, really easy solutions.
To help you get the best from your garden. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now this time of year has all kinds of riches, but I guess above all it is the season of fruit. Fruit of every kind, from apples and pears and plums and gauges. There are fruits of every kind, but amongst my favourite at this point are the crab apples. I planted this tree about 25 years ago. It's never got very big, but it does carry a lovely burden of bejewelled fruits. Small, getting richer in colour as the month progresses, and then they make delicious crabapple jelly. Someone said to me the other day that they'd never eaten crabapple jelly. Well, there's a treat in store. It is beautiful. On tonight's programme, we join Carol as she visits RHS Rosemore in Devon, where she is celebrating the rose family.
It's absolutely fascinating to see the diversity of different flowers and different leaves.
Adam is sketching plans for his country garden.
That sort of idea of maybe using architecture initially to inspire the shapes of the garden.
And Flo Headlam has got a few tricks to help transform a small urban garden.
So I'm not going to plant at ground level, I'm going to plant up, and I've got a cunning solution.
Now I'm going to be planting my very first mulberry in the orchard, as well as pruning roses, and we've got the rest of the team visiting a wide range of gardens around the country. I've got a whole load of wallflowers grown from seed, which are doing very nicely in plugs, but I want to plant them out because if you have a plant in a plug, there's always a moment at which it can only get worse. And if you have a plug like that, you've got a nice filigree of roots on the outside, but it's not wrapping around. It hasn't exhausted the nutrients. So that's a very healthy young plant. But I'd like it to be at least twice as big when I plant it out sometime around the middle or end of October. Now, the only way to do that is either put it on into a pot or, much easier, plant it out into the garden where it can grow on until I'm ready to put it in its final position. And the only place in the veg garden which is suitable is here. Now, this was a brassica bed. Nellie, why do you always have to fight? We were peaceful, we were calm. You're not listening. There we go. And wallflowers are brassicas. Now, you don't normally follow in the rotation in a vegetable garden brassica with brassica. It normally goes legume brassica roots. So next year, I'd expect to grow carrots and parsnips in here, but there'll be no harm in just popping the wallflowers in for a month, 6 weeks. They're visiting, they're lodgers in this piece of ground. Right, it's hot. If I put my jacket down now, will you lie quietly? Go on, no. So, we'll take the net off. And this has been here against the pigeons. The pigeon population has either increased dramatically, or else they've discovered that I grow nice food for them, and they've all latched onto it. Now, these are summer cabbages, but some of them are still good. Nothing wrong with that at all. That's cleared the ground. I just now need to fork it over lightly. I'm not digging it as such, I'm just loosening it. There's no question that brassicas do respond well to a good dressing of compost when you plant them, which means that these wallflowers would also respond as a brassica. So I'm going to get a little bit of garden compost and work it into the soil just to give them a boost, because what I'm looking for is maximum size. And although the small ones will grow and survive and get bigger in time, you always get a better display simply on the size of plant. It wouldn't be a compost heap without bottle tops and bits of wrapping and packaging. Surprised we haven't got a teaspoon, kitchen knife. That ring you lost 3 years ago and suddenly mysteriously pops up in the compost heap. If you don't want to, there's no need to dig that in. That will work very effectively as a mulch because the bacteria and the fungi will get into the soil without any help from you whatsoever. You can see there are worms wiggling in there. They will work it in. The rain will wash it in. That will very quickly incorporate into the soil. So I'll just leave that and plant through them. Right, we can start planting. I've got two types of wallflower. I've got cloth of gold, which the name suggests is gold, and blood red. These are blood red. So, blood red is a lovely rich carmine. And in spring, in April, you get that intensity of colour. Looks really good with orange tulips, with yellow. And of course, on top of that, if that wasn't enough, there's the most beautiful, sweet honey fragrance. I remember one year, the first year I did it, I grew them in the long walk. And they were going down, and you couldn't really smell them from distance, but as you crossed it, it was like diving into a fragrant pool. You were suddenly bathed in this wonderful scent. And as you left, it remained just like a memory. Lovely experience. Now, it's time to join Carol as she returns with her series on plant families at RHS Rosemore in Devon. And this week, she's looking at the rose family.
There are over 400 plant families with more than 300,000 species. Family Rosaceae contains more than 2,500 species. When you gather together members of the rose family, it's absolutely fascinating to see the diversity of different flowers and different leaves. But there are striking similarities too. If you look at a typical rose, it's got 5 petals. Go on to the strawberry, 5 petals too. The potentilla, this gorgeous gilenia too, although they're a completely different shape, but it's still got 5 petals. And another characteristic that a lot of them have in common is when you look at these flowers, inside is a cluster, a positive pom-pom of these stamens, each of them with an anther and each anther loaded with pollen. All the rose family make masses of pollen, but they make no nectar at all. So it's these big, bright flowers that bring in the insects in the first place. Another way to garner clues about who belongs to the rose family is to look at the leaves. They're almost always alternate. In other words, instead of being opposite one another, they're on the other side of the stem and a bit further up. And if you look at the leaves of this Physocarpus, you can see another factor that lots of members of the rose family have in common. They've got this serrated, toothed edge to them. That's true of this and most of these other examples here. You'd hardly believe that this was a member of the rose family, but it is. The Rosaceae family includes many shrubs, such as potentilla, prunus and pyracantha, and several valuable herbaceous perennials, including geums. Geum is a real garden stalwart, and are a huge boon in any garden that can offer them moist, fertile soil and shade from strong sun. The family Rosaceae is blessed with all manner of really special, exquisite trees, like this gorgeous example here. This is a hawthorn, but it doesn't look at all like the hawthorns we're used to seeing in our hedgerows. It's got these big, shiny leaves, and the berries are big, and there are lots and lots of them. And in autumn, they're going to become the most delightful colour, pink and crimson. And this is yet another member of the same family. It's a crabapple. At first sight, it looks nothing like one. We're used to crabapples being big fruit, but here they're tiny, and they're preceded in the spring by dainty white flowers that absolutely smother the branches. All these trees are fully mature, so you can imagine being able to accommodate them in any small garden. The Rosaceae family takes its name from one of our most familiar plants, the rose. Every year, all around the world, millions of roses are propagated, usually from budding or grafting. But you can make your own new roses just from taking stem cuttings. Grab some material. The top shoots are the very best, and the best time of year is right now, although you can take cuttings right the way through from late spring into the autumn. But at this moment, they're bendy, but they're not soft, so they're ideal, sort of semi-ripe wood. Take your cutting, cut very carefully with a knife or secateurs right under a leaf and remove these bottom leaves. This is a bit tall, but I'm going to take out this apical growth anyway, just that top little shoot. That means that when the cutting roots, it will tend to grow sideways, and that's just what you want, a nice bushy plant. And then you can use anything to do this, but round the side of a clay pot for preference. Clay pots are great because they're porous, so the cutting is never sitting in soggy compost. Push your cutting down right to the side until that bottom leaf is actually level with the soil. You want to make sure that the cuttings don't touch each other if possible. And again, insert it so that that is parallel. So 3 in that pot I think is fine, it's adequate. And then, once I've done that, I'm going to cover the top of this with grit to retain moisture, to ensure that weeds don't grow on the top, and to make sure that it doesn't rot. Water it really well, and then put it into a nice bright place, but out of direct sun. After a matter of weeks, if you take them at this time of year, you should get decent rooty cuttings like this, and it's at that stage that you can pot them on individually. And then, this time next year, you can put your new roses out into the garden.
I started planting roses here in the cottage garden a few years ago, and in particular, 2 years ago, I planted 32 new roses. Now, last year they were very small. This year, they've thrown up like this one. This is William Lobb, a moss rose. A huge, great shoot. And then the ones on the left, which are about 3 or 4 years older, are now very vigorous. And it's quite common when you plant new roses to have erratic, irregular growth. Now in September is a really good time to both prune new roses, so they get into some sort of shape, and also establish shrub roses. Don't worry about summer pruning or winter pruning or provoking growth or restricting growth or anything like that. Just get it into shape. So if we take that stem there of this rose and just cut that back, immediately the bush is starting to feel roughly the sort of shape I want. So likewise, back here we've got some that are getting a little bit tall and I want them to spread a little bit more, so we can just tip them back. This is a Gallica, one of my favourite roses of all, called Charles de Mills, which has a flower that is a lovely cherry, rich, pinky red. And it looks so a knife has cleanly sliced it in half, like cutting an orange in half. So the petals are completely open and exposed. It's a fabulous rose. So I want it to be in as good shape as possible to bear its flowers next year. This one can be cut right back to there, and I'm holding that as gently as a man can hold a thorn without it sinking deep into his flesh. That couldn't be more bristly if it tried. If you've got more established roses, like the ones in these beds, which are now 4 years old, this time of year, the best way to treat them is get a pair of shears or even some hedge cutters and just trim them evenly. Just clip it over neatly so it's a neat shape. This is an alba called Cuista nymph, a nymph's thigh. It's a glorious flower, and tough too. This plant will take a lot of hacking about. This is all the pruning it needs in order to give you a really good display. Whereas most roses do their flowering in summer, there are some that are remontant, that come back. And the English roses are particularly good for that. They flower gloriously in June and July, then take a bit of a break in August. But now in September, they're coming back with a second flush and will go on flowering well into autumn. I've got 3 here I particularly like. This is Crown Princess Margarita, and it's as near to apricot as I've got in this garden. These beautiful flowers, but my absolute favourite is this one. It's called the Pilgrim. It's flush with touches of raspberry before it opens out into this beautiful, tightly crinkled display of delicate, pale lemon, and also has a glorious scent. It's a really good rose, and this will go on flowering for at least another month, if not 2. Most of the fruits at this time of year are members of the rose family, apples and pears, but also plums and greengages and damsons, some of my favourite fruits. And whilst a lot of us have these trees as individuals in our garden, plum orchards are becoming increasingly rare, whereas they used to be very common, particularly in the area around Worcester and Worcestershire. And we went to visit one of the few surviving ones, which is being conserved by a group of volunteers and experts.
This orchard is mainly centred around Pershore yellow egg and purple Pershores. They were probably planted early 1950s, when there was still a call for plums, particularly in the Birmingham markets and down to London. But sadly, the plum industry here was on the wane by then. The heyday was really late 1800s, beginning in the 1900s. I was always interested in growing crops because my father was in farming. He was a farm foreman in Essex, and his family had been involved in fruit growing in Suffolk. But since retirement and getting involved with conservation, bringing the two together is something quite new for me and quite fascinating as well. Gary Farmer is the project manager for the Failed Landscape Heritage Trust. We often meet up to discuss fruit projects because the trust as a whole has nearly 100 acres of old orchards one way or another.
So with this tree in particular then, John, what sort of pruning are we going for?
The ideal shape really for the amateur to do from now on really is this A-shaped or Christmas tree-shaped tree. It's easier to manage and doesn't take up so much space either. In this situation, because our pickers have to pick from the floor, we're going to have to go for the open centre tree shape that traditionally has been grown on here. One of the problems with the open centre tree, if it's got a lot of growth in the centre, very little light gets in to initiate the flowers, and so the only flowers that we find, and fruit eventually, are on the end of the branches. Right, we use a saw that has been sterilised before using and cleaned. But I'm going to cut out this very strong one up the centre first. Now I'm cutting at a slight angle so that we get runoff of water if necessary in the future. Now at this point, people are undecided whether they should paint the cut or not. If you suddenly find rain is threatening, then it's worthwhile painting that cut, particularly as it's quite a large one. You can use a proprietary pruning paint to stop the ingress of things like bacterial canker. But you do need to do the painting within half an hour of making the cut so that you actually keep the spores out. So we're here today picking plums. The people you see round about are volunteers, and they've been picking all day, quite a hot day. But this is a reasonable crop here. We're getting a good sized plum. We're picking something like 60, 80 trays. It's quite a fruity smelling house this time of year.
Well, I think any household that's fruity is a good household. At this time of year, there's so much to choose from, but my guess is that not many people will be harvesting these. This is a mulberry. Oh, it's really intense taste. Fabulous fruit, makes fantastic jam, and also the tree is one of the most beautiful garden trees you can grow. But one thing I would say about this fruit is nothing stains like a mulberry. And probably my lips are all red having eaten that one there. So I want to plant one here in the orchard, and it's the first mulberry tree I will ever have grown. I've often sat beneath them, I've harvested the fruit, but always in other people's gardens. They're very typical of Jacobean gardens, because James I wanted to start the silk industry, so ordered 1 million mulberry trees to be planted in every county town in the land. An edict went out to his Lord Lieutenants. One slight problem was that the mulberry trees that they planted were this, Morus nigra, not Morus alba. And Morus alba is the one that the silkworm eats, and this just produces the berries, hence the demise of the British silk industry before it even began. But never mind, the legacy are beautiful trees. Now, any tree that you're planting, whether it's in a pot like that or bare root, you need a nice, big, bare space around it. The best way to help a young tree on its way is to remove all competition for moisture and nutrients. And grass and weeds will always take the available water and food first, and then the tree will struggle. Then when the tree is mature, you let the grass come up around it again, and that slows it down. This is a variety called Chelsea, sometimes known as King James. And traditionally, mulberry trees weren't planted by digging big holes and loosening the soil and anything like that. They simply took a branch, the thickness of an ankle and 5 foot tall, and hammered it like a post into moist ground in winter, and the tree grew. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of biochar. This is mycorrhizal fungi mixed up with charcoal. Really good for giving trees and shrubs a start in life. So we'll take that out. It's a nice healthy plant. And we'll put that in there. Yeah, that's about the right height. That's good. And when you're adding mycorrhizae or biochar, you do need to spread it directly onto the roots. place that there, nice in the centre. Now, I'm going around now firming this in really well. Now, it's absolutely vital, starting from the outside, and I'll stake it. You can either put it upright like that, or, and it's better, at an angle pointing into the prevailing wind. Now, the prevailing wind here comes from over there. It's a westerly, and it blows this way. So I want to put the stake in about like that. That's pretty secure. Now, when you tie a tree in, be sure to keep the trunk away from the stake so it doesn't rub. Don't try it too tight. Movement like that is absolutely fine because that will strengthen the trunk and give it more flexibility. And always, even if it's wet, give a new tree a good soak, 2 or 3 gallons. So you water it, and then finally mulch it. And mulch it well. So you put all the goodness on top of the soil, not underneath it. You don't need to mulch with your very best compost. Anything that's going to keep in the moisture and suppress the weeds is worth doing. So bark chips, even gravel, is better than nothing.
Still to come, Nick Mesa is in London, visiting a hidden exotic treasure.
Oh my goodness. So this is the tropical oasis I've heard so much about. This is it.
And we pay a visit to Torquay, where a combination of a kind Devon climate and a quirky use of space has transformed a suburban garden.
And we're into another part of the garden
Yes,
again.
we're heading towards the Italianate area now.
Blimey, this place is a TARDIS, isn't it?
Now, this tree is a very welcome addition to what is becoming an established orchard. But 25 years ago, when we first came here, there was nothing. There was just an empty field. So I know exactly that mixture of excitement and slight trepidation that Adam Frost is feeling as he tackles his new garden in Lincolnshire. He introduced us to the plot last week, and now he presents some of his plans.
May is that wonderful time of year where the garden really starts to come to life and our gardens feel fresh and renewed. It's just a few weeks since we moved in, and so things feel really exciting, like a brand new beginning.
So I just want to give you some idea of how the house sits within the garden.
I suppose where I'm standing now, I'd call the main family garden. It wraps itself around the house and has a south and a west-facing aspect. In this garden area, I've got a formal bed of roses and a wonderful old pergola that's covered in rambling and climbing roses. There's a large lawn and also a small west-facing terrace, and the walls covered in scented climbers. And of course, I've got that beautiful old wisteria. So adjacent to the family garden, I have what every gardener dreams of, a walled garden. And its boundaries run all the way along the front drive. This wonderful space has 2 borders, one facing west and one facing south. It also features a large lawn and a small orchard.
And then the other side is this fantastic woodland that more or less wraps its way all the way around the property.
Then just on the other side of the drive, as you approach the house, I've got another lovely little wall space, which is going to be my veg garden. We've still only been in our new home for a matter of weeks, so it's early days for the veg garden, but work has begun. We've scraped the weeds and the top growth and cleared the site, and my next job is to come up with a detailed design. One big thing when you stand down the sort of bottom end of this garden is actually you look back at the house, at these lovely sort of little Georgian detail windows. That sort of idea of maybe using architecture initially to inspire the shapes of the garden. And remember, everything that, designed off the house, all those first set of hard materials and pathways, that's your sort of last connection with the architecture of your house, and that really sort of sets the platforms and the connection with your wider garden. So a great place to start. As I said, this is not to scale at the moment, so this is just pouring out ideas on a piece of paper. So what do I want? I want a greenhouse, because actually I want somewhere I can grow veggies all the way through, and I want to put that maybe in the centre of the garden so that gets really good light levels. So I know that actually down here is east, And up the top there is west, which is really important, you know, where that sun rises, where it sets. Greenhouse is going to get good light all day long. Maybe the cooking area sits in up here, so that sits next to the greenhouse. Cold frames is another thing that I want, you know, to sort of harden stuff off, grow seeds, get stuff ready for the next year. So what else do I want from this space? I like the idea of actually building some hotbeds, you know, the idea that I can grow veggies sort of going into the back end of the year, or even, you know, after Christmas. Even maybe next year we might grow some melons. So that'll be a nice big raised bed. Maybe I need some height somewhere else. At Barnsdale, Jeff used to grow asparagus, you know, in raised beds because we're on a clay soil, and they love that free draining soil. So maybe it would be lovely to have a raised asparagus bed. So sort of keep the ideas nice and free and flowy. Maybe there's some planting up above the greenhouse. And there you go, look down on it. You know, it's a series of simple shapes. All right, you can talk about design in much more detail, but in its simplest form, you know, looking down, garden design is about space, but it's about shapes. Just have some fun. But there is one feature in my garden that definitely doesn't need redesigning.
This wisteria did not disappoint. The flowers were absolutely stunning. I mean, the scent was fantastic. It's like I've had to be drawn here every day just to have 5 minutes and actually just enjoy it. And maybe that's what we don't do enough of sometimes, is just enjoy our gardens. I think it's the whole season with wisteria. You know, now it's gone on to that really sort of lush green growth that looks beautiful. It just gives you a warm feeling. Just trying to keep these beautiful old yew domes going. Actually bought them from the other house, but just give them a bit of a liquid feed. I moved them a bit late, and they're really starting to suffer, but I think if I get them through the summer, they'll be all right. The thing that's really bugging me is this front garden. I was coming home from work, pulling in, and there was this sea of gravel that went all the way up to the house. This beautiful old house, and it looks sort of slightly uncared for, and which is actually how I feel about a lot of front gardens in the UK. I just feel like they're a missed opportunity. So much of this country has covered up its front gardens with cars and paving. And actually, do you know what? When you arrive at somebody's house, the first thing you see, even before you go in their front door, is their front garden. And what an opportunity. And not only for us, but for the streetscape, for wildlife. You know, you can really do something amazing in your front gardens. Anyway, rant over. Back to my front garden, and which has ended up really being designed around the Texas domes. Every single Chelsea garden I've ever built, I've always wanted to take something home, just a little memento. And they become memories, you know, and these become like members of the family. This is not normally the way that I design. Normally, everything goes on paper. But because these little beauties had to go in the ground, these have started to drive the other ideas for the design, which now is really starting to formulate in my head.
Whilst Adam is developing his beautiful country garden, Flo Headlam has been visiting urban spaces in a series on greening grey brick.
Today, I'm in the heart of Bristol, in Bedminster, to visit a surprising and inspiring inner-city space that's undergone a dramatic transformation. Hi, Steve. Hi, I'm Flo.
Hi, Flo.
Hi.
Welcome to Windmill Hill City Farm car park.
It's not a car park now. What's the transformation?
Well, I started work here about 5 years ago as chief exec, and got a little bit fed up walking through a flat tarmac expanse to get to what should be a city farm. And so had a chat with local people and some trustees and said, how about we green the space up?
So tell me, how did you build the garden?
Well, we started with some big ideas about what we wanted the space to be. So we had the staff team involved, and then loads and loads of volunteers. And there were so many people from the community that came in to help us make this space. Fantastic. And such a pleasure to see it every day evolving with all that help.
The garden makes the most of the different conditions the old car park has to offer. Under the canopy of two beautiful old cherry trees is a shady scheme. On the other, sunnier side, there's a rock garden full of small plants, all chosen to attract pollinators.
So in here you can see we've some perfume there.
Yes.
We've got some thyme.
Oh, yes, but just let me... Oh, that's what you want to do. Just smell it. Yeah, gorgeous.
Really nice kind of sensory kind of aspects to it. And then we've got edible bits as well, so you can see the strawberries that we've got around the edge.
Oh, there's one here. May I?
Yep. Please do, and help yourself. It's very much a people's garden, this, you know. We want people to come and get into it and be involved in it.
What I really like about this garden is that everyone's worked really hard to transform what was a big tarmac car park into a thing of beauty. The solution here was to build raised beds using railway sleepers. That's fine if you've got a car park, but what if you've got a tiny grey space that's aching for some green? Well, I have a few tricks up my sleeve. This is a small urban garden where space is a premium. So I'm not going to plant at ground level, I'm going to plant up. And I've got a cunning solution. I've got these funky vertical planters. And the great thing about these planters is you can hang them on walls, you can hang them on trellises. So I've got two. I'm going to put the first one here. And then the second one, I think I'll stagger. That looks good. I'm happy with that. And now I'm ready to plant up. So what I like to do, and I'm sure many of you do as well, is to mock up your composition before you make your final decisions. So I'm just going to pop the plants in and just move them around to see what I'm happy with. So the plants I'm using here, they are loving full sun. They'll thrive really well here. I particularly love this echinacea, which it's called copper carpet, and just that beautiful sort of dark purple brown against this vibrant yellow, I think is just wonderful. We've got ivy, which as it grows, it's going to trail, and dianthus, which, you know, are alpine flowers and just love sun and free draining soil. Look at that shocking pink against that shocking yellow. Fantastic. Love that combination. Yes, that's it. It's time to add the compost. I'm adding water-retaining granules to help conserve moisture. And at the final stage, give them a good old watering. There, job done.
There's no question that just a little bit of colour and life improves the quality of everybody's lives. Passers-by, people who live there, everybody benefits. Now, I don't know if my herbs, Mediterranean herbs, are benefiting from our wet weather. Remember, last winter was phenomenally wet. It rained here all winter. And although these raised beds have got very good drainage, my rosemary has suffered. There's a dieback here. This is very familiar. It's probably a kind of phytophthora, a fungal problem caused by damp. Not just damp in the soil, which the rosemaries hate, but also damp in the atmosphere. These plants are wet day in, day out. They store the damp, and of course the fungus loves that. So what I've got in the habit of doing is taking rosemary cuttings regularly and growing new plants and just accepting I'm going to have to replace plants most years. Luckily, rosemary cuttings are very simple, and now is the perfect time to take them. Now, what you're looking for is nice, straight, new growth. It's got a little bit of bendiness, but also firm enough, so it's not going to just flop as soon as you cut it. So we're looking for growth like that. That's perfect. This time of year, September, is perfect for box cuttings, for rosemary, for lavender. You can take thyme cuttings, but it doesn't matter what they are. It doesn't matter how tough they are or how easy they are to take as cuttings. Treat them with respect. So have a polythene bag, pop them in, and that will mean that the moisture loss is reduced. Fold it over, and then don't hang about. Once you've cut your material, try and convert that into a cutting in a pot as quickly as you can. Now, before you open the polythene bag, prepare a really good, gritty cutting mix for the compost. Mix 50-50, either with horticultural grit or something like perlite and vermiculite. What you're looking for is very free drainage indeed. Now, this is particularly the case for a Mediterranean herb like rosemary, but all cuttings take better if the drainage is free. And if you take out a suitable cutting, now what you don't want is all that foliage, because having cut this plant, it is essentially dying. So we need to put it on life resuscitation. So we strip off these lower leaves, is reducing the demands that are made upon it, and cut it ideally just below a leaf node, but don't be too precious about that. And then put it in the edge of the pot, right down. Very similar to the way Carol took her rose cuttings. And you put them around the edge of the pot, because it loses moisture less quickly. It just makes them dry out less, and that really is what the race is about. If you can develop roots before the plant dries out, it'll survive. Put a bit of grit on there. Water that. Put it somewhere where it is light but not burning hot. Keep it reasonably moist. Keep the air moist, but don't have to soak it. Those will root in about a month's time. What I do is leave them in this over winter and then pop them on next spring. And by this time next year, they're nice, healthy plants. Now, there you are. Cuttings that everybody can take. And here are some other jobs that everybody can do, too. The worst pest for vegetable growers across the land at this time of year is the cabbage white butterfly. The butterfly itself is charming, but its caterpillars can devastate any member of the brassica family. The best way to deal with them is to check each plant, turning over the leaves, and simply remove any caterpillars that you find. If, like me, you sowed root vegetables about a month ago, it's important to thin them carefully, leaving an inch or two between each plant to give them a chance to grow nice and strong before winter comes. This is not a new job, but it is very timely, and that is to deadhead. If you deadhead now any flowers that are faded or spent, you will extend your flowering season well into autumn. Now, inevitably, the plants we choose to grow and our gardens say a lot about ourselves. Head gardener Jane Moore has been to a distinctly quirky garden in Torquay with a very creative use of space.
Goodness me, Graham, can hardly find you in this jungle.
Hello, Jane.
Graham left his native Lancashire and came south seeking the sunshine when he was 21, and he's never looked back. His garden's changed beyond all recognition since he bought the house in 1980. You've got so many plants packed in here, haven't you?
Hundreds of tropical plants as well as
Hundreds and hundreds, I should think. Yeah.
This is a lantana. It's a subtropical plant. I believe it's from the southern hemisphere. We grow lots of them in the garden.
That's a cracking and beautiful one over your shoulder then.
Yes.
Look at that one.
It's called tiger eye.
Oh, isn't it lovely?
Yes.
What a little beauty.
Here we are. This is the blue acroma.
Oh, they just dropped. Oh, there's one.
Yes. Beautiful blue bells. Yes.
A really nice little lavender blue.
Yeah.
I love this solanum, the variegation and big blue flowers.
Yes, it's a fabulous variety.
I love the way you let them just scramble around, because they really don't like being trained, do they?
No.
They like to scramble. Oh, gosh, you've got some very interesting things, haven't you? It's a proper jungle out here.
Yes.
How did you get interested in gardening? Because you've got some very interesting plants here. Real plantaholics garden you've got here.
Well, when I left school, I did 2 years horticulture, and then I went into engineering.
Right.
And then I came to Torquay in the early 70s. Fell in love with Torbay.
Yeah, well, it is a bit of a plantsman's area, actually, this as well, isn't it? Because of this lovely balmy temperatures that you get here.
Yes, yes.
So,
we've got a lovely microclimate I've created by letting the hedges grow very tall.
But what's fueled your interest in the tropical plants? Because you could?
Yes.
Because you could here?
That's right.
So you opened for the Yellow Book, don't you? The National Garden Scheme.
Yes. And this year we had 123 guests on our best day.
That is a lot of tea and cake.
It's a lot of tea and cake.
As well as 6 water features, 14 seating areas and countless homemade sculptures, there are 2 greenhouses, 2 compost heaps, 26 water butts and a duck pen concealed amongst the foliage. And we're into another part of the garden again.
We're heading towards the Italianate area now.
Blimey, this place is a TARDIS, isn't it?
It is. Going past a very productive fig.
Oh, yes.
And the
is that
kiwi
fruit?
fruit. Yeah, we had 600 in the best year.
Oh,
I've got photographs to prove it.
Wow. What on earth do you do with 600 kiwi fruit?
We store them in the garage and we eat them from November through to April. Follow the windy path.
Lead the way. Graham, I just love this garden. It's such a plantsman's paradise, but it's also got a great sense of humour.
Yes, I think gardening should be fun.
I agree.
Just come through the African area there, past the bog, and under the plum tree. And here we are. I think this is the most spectacular piece of our garden.
It's lovely.
Yes. Golden bamboos.
This garden is less a garden tour, it's more of an adventure, really, isn't it? It's such a different mood to elsewhere in the garden, isn't it?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And, here we have a topiary swan.
Oh, that's lovely. The swan's in flight, isn't it?
Yes.
Really nice.
And here we have the tea house. Lovely area.
Got to try this out for size.
Yeah.
Feel more serene. I tell you what is missing, though, a Japanese cherry. Of course. I think one of the lovely arching Japanese cherries would really lend itself.
Right, that's a very good idea.
Yeah, if you can find a space for it, that is.
Yes.
Because I'm not sure you can. Yes, well, I guess where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
In the second part of his series on exotic Britain, Nick Mesa is in London, visiting a garden that is as far removed from the hurly-burly of city life as could be imagined.
I'm in Islington, North London, deep within the heart of the urban Heat Islands. This is something created by people, buildings, traffic. It raises the temperature of London to a few degrees above the surrounding countryside and allows all manner of things to be grown here that you couldn't otherwise grow. I've come to see an exotic courtyard, and I hear a Mexican-themed roof garden.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, David. Good to see you.
Hi, nice to see you.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. So this is the tropical oasis I've heard so much about.
This is it.
I'm loving this view down here. Such a tropical feel.
Yeah, the idea is for it to be as little like London as possible.
Sure. Bananas overhead?
Yeah, there's two bananas that are cold hardy enough to grow in London. I've got both of them. This is Musabaz Jew, and this is Musa sikimensis. I used to grow these in the ground here, but they need an enormous amount of water, and this garden has an issue with drought. And I've found that every few years they need to be moved because they're exhausting the soil. So now I keep them in pots, and if it gets super, super cold, I can just cut them down a bit and pull them indoors until the freeze ends. You can just sort of see this new leaf turns gradually the most extraordinary colour of pale red violet. And I've managed to get some photos of that when the new leaf is just unfurling and it's almost purple with the sun behind it. It looks absolutely amazing.
Beautiful. Yeah. What I love, David, what I really love, is that you haven't just used classic exotic plants like Trachycarpus musa, but you're using equally good foliage plants like hellebores, pulmonarias, and they look great.
Well, I tend to use my eyes for these things rather than take sort of rigid positions about what's exotic and what's not. And I find there's quite a lot of quite traditional plants, particularly the hellebores and some varieties of Persicaria, that look good with the architecturally exotic, and if they look right, I don't mind.
So, David, this looks like a shadier, drier end of the garden here.
Well, it is now. When I started, this was actually the sunny end of the garden, and I planted a less than a metre tall phoenix date palm. It was originally intended as a space filler because I didn't think it would be hardy, but it rapidly turned into a sort of 6 metre wide, nearly 5 metre tall monster with a half-metre trunk. I mean, I wouldn't be without it, but it's completely changed the microclimate down at this end of the garden.
So it's clearly a tough site. What have you got growing?
Well, there's a few different types of Persicaria, which is quite invasive. But in this kind of level of dryness, invasive starts to be a bit welcome. It survives. Behind us, we've got a totally different look of a plant. This is Begonia luxurians, which arguably might be hardy in London if I were to pile a huge heap of mulch on it. But I keep it in pots. I plunge the pots in spring, lift them and take them indoors for frosty periods because I like to keep the framework and keep it growing.
It's great to see such a wide diversity of plants growing in such what would appear to be such a difficult habitat in this end of the garden.
I just keep trying different stuff, and the stuff that works and looks right I do more of, basically.
Wow, the roof. That is considerably different, isn't it? What a contrast from down below at the tropical jungle up to this sunny, rocky, open hillside. We have Mexico here with the agaves, rosemary sisters from the Mediterranean.
A lot of Mediterranean.
Aloes from South Africa.
That's right.
And what do you put your success down to there?
Treat them mean, keep them keen. I think a lot of the plants on this roof are selected because they actually quite like growing in the very shallow soil, restricted conditions, not only the agaves, but things like rosemary, which seem to pick the most free-draining, gravelly, and least hospitable parts of the roof. Yeah. The advantage of having the very shallow soil is that plants that don't like winter wet, they might get wet for a while in winter, but because there's so little soil, they dry out pretty quickly. Yeah. And because this bit of the garden, this bit of the green roof is on quite a steep slope, and is the sunniest bit, this is where I've tended to concentrate the xerophytes, the plants that like dry conditions and dry soil. This is agave fallifera. This has been up here for about 15 years, I think. I trialled different types of agave up here. And then we had a huge long freeze that many gardeners will remember in 2010. And it taught me which 3 of them were hardy, because I lost all the rest. The Mediterranean shrubs, particularly, I've discovered that this family, this tribe of cistus, they just love it up here. I think it's not dissimilar to where they grow in habitat, which is sort of cracks in the sides of mountains, fighting their roots into the rocks and things. The biggest and probably most successful one is this one, which is Cistus cross Janseroa decumbens. It's forming itself into a very large shrub, and it's starting to block my path now. I think I'm going to have to relocate my path, because the cistus comes first.
I've been deeply inspired by your roof garden, especially, David. I love what you've created here. I'd love to create one myself one day.
Well, I'll come down and help you with it.
Thank you.
I do think that the key to inner city gardens is fantasy. Something that you go in and then you're transported to another world. As well as fruitfulness, September is the month of leaving, and there's no departure that saddens me more every year than the swallows. And they're there, massing, swirling around, sometimes hundreds at a time. And I know what they're doing. They're fattening themselves up, getting ready to go. And sometime in the next week or so, suddenly there'll be an absence. And that's it. And then you just have to wait to that fabulous day, sometimes around the second week of April, when the first one, tired, comes back. Come on, Lige. Let's get on with it.
Come on. Well, the swallows may be heading south for warmer weather, but what's in store for us this weekend?